Jake Morrison stood at the docking bay window, watching the massive alien space station grow larger as his transport ship approached. Kepler Station looked nothing like the military bases he knew on Earth. Instead of gray concrete and steel, the station gleamed with smooth curves and bright lights. Strange symbols covered its surface, and ships of designs he had never seen moved in and out of its many docking ports. The transport captain, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms, spoke to him in broken English. "First time at Kepler Station, human?" "Yes," Jake replied, adjusting his duffel bag on his shoulder. The bag contained everything he owned now that he was part of the Galactic Council's military exchange program. 3 months ago, he had been a Marine sergeant stationed in California. Now he was about to become the first human student at the galaxy's most famous military academy. The captain made a sound that might have been laughter. "Good luck, Deathworlder. You will need it." Jake had heard that word before. Deathworlder. It was what the aliens called humans and the few other species that came from dangerous planets. Earth, with its high gravity, violent weather, and deadly animals, was considered one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. Most aliens thought this made humans primitive and savage. The docking was smooth and quiet. Jake gathered his things and followed the other passengers off the ship. The moment he stepped onto the station, he felt the difference. The gravity was much lighter than Earth's. Each step made him feel like he might float away. The air was clean and smelled like flowers, nothing like the recycled air of military bases. A group of alien cadets stood near the docking bay entrance. They wore crisp uniforms of dark blue with silver trim. Their ranks and insignia were different from anything Jake knew, but he could tell they were students by their young faces and nervous energy. When they saw him, their conversation stopped. One of them, a tall alien with gray skin and large black eyes, stepped forward. "You are the human," he said. It was not a question. "Jake Morrison," Jake said, offering his hand for a handshake. The alien looked at his extended hand like it might bite him. "I am Crixval, squad leader Vex 7. You've been assigned to my unit." He did not shake Jake's hand. The other cadets whispered among themselves. Jake caught words and languages he did not understand, but their tone was clear. They were not happy about his presence. "This way," Crixval said, turning sharply and walking toward the station's interior. Jake followed, his heavy footsteps echoing loudly in the quiet corridors. The other cadets walked so lightly they barely made any sound. Everything about the station was designed for beings much lighter and smaller than humans. The ceilings were low, forcing Jake to duck in some areas. The doorways were narrow, and he had to turn sideways to fit through several of them. They passed through sections filled with classrooms, training rooms, and dormitories. Alien students stopped their activities to stare as Jake walked by. Some pointed and whispered. Others simply watched with wide eyes, as if they were seeing a dangerous animal at a zoo. "Here," Crixval said, stopping at a door marked with alien symbols. "Your quarters. You share with Pip 7. The door slid open to reveal a small room with 2 beds, 2 desks, and a large window showing the stars outside. One side of the room was already occupied. Personal items sat on the desk, and the bed was neatly made. A small alien emerged from what Jake assumed was the bathroom. He was barely 4 feet tall, with soft green fur covering his body and large, nervous eyes. When he saw Jake, he jumped back and hit the wall. "This is Pip 7, Crixval said. "He is Quillen. His people are peaceful." Pip 7 looked terrified. His large eyes darted between Jake and the door as if planning an escape route. "Hello," Jake said, trying to sound friendly. "I'm Jake." Pip 7 said nothing. He pressed himself against the wall and trembled slightly. Crixval made that sound that might have been laughter again. "Do not worry, Pip 7. If the Deathworlder eats you, we will find you another roommate." "I don't eat people," Jake said firmly. "Of course not," Crixval replied, but his tone suggested he did not believe it. "Dinner is at 1800 hours. Training begins at 0600 tomorrow. Try not to break anything." He left without another word. Jake set his bag on the empty bed and looked around the room. Everything was built for smaller beings. The bed was too short and too narrow. The desk was too low. Even the bathroom fixtures were size wrong. Pip 7 had not moved from the wall. He watched Jake with the expression of prey animal watching a predator. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said gently. "I'm just here to learn. Same as you." Pip 7's voice was barely a whisper. "My people know stories about deathworlders. They say you come from a planet where everything tries to kill you. They say it makes you violent." Jake sat on his bed, which creaked under his weight. "Some of that's true. Earth is dangerous. But that doesn't make me violent. It just makes me careful. Your planet has predators that hunt in packs," Pip 7 said, still pressed against the wall. "And weather that can kill, and plants that are poisonous." "Yes," Jake admitted, "but it also taught us to work together, to solve problems, to survive." Pip 7 seemed to consider this. Slowly, very slowly, he moved away from the wall. "The other cadets say humans are primitive. They say your technology is crude and your methods are barbaric." Jake thought about the sleek alien ships and the advanced technology all around him. Compared to this, human technology did seem primitive. Maybe they're right about our technology, but being primitive doesn't mean being stupid. "Crix Val says it will not last a week," Pip 7 said, sitting carefully on his own bed. "He says the training will be too difficult for a Deathworlder." Jake looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, where he had survived boot camp, combat training, and 2 deployments to hostile zones. "We'll see about that." Pip 7 was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have never seen a human before. You are much larger than I expected. And you're smaller than I expected," Jake replied with a smile. "But that doesn't mean we can't be friends." For the first time, Pip 7's expression changed from fear to curiosity. "Friends, if you want," Jake said. "I could use at least one friend in this place." Outside their window, the alien space station continued its orbit around the distant star. Tomorrow would bring Jake's first day of training at the galaxy's most elite military academy. He had no idea what challenges waited for him, but he was determined to prove that humans belonged among the stars. Jake's first morning at the academy began with a rude awakening. The alarm that woke the alien cadets was a soft chime that barely registered to his human ears. He only woke up when Pip 7 gently shook his shoulder. "Jake," the small alien whispered, "it is time for morning formation." Jake sat up quickly, his head hitting the low ceiling above his bed. He rubbed the bump and looked around the room. Pip 7 was already dressed in his crisp academy uniform. Jake's uniform hung on a hook nearby, but when he held it up, he could see it would be too small. "Problem?" Pip 7 asked. "Everything here is built for people your size," Jake said, struggling to fit into the uniform shirt. The sleeve stopped halfway down his forearms, and the chest was tight across his broad shoulders. Pip 7 looked worried. Being late to formation is not good. Crix Val will be angry. Jake managed to get the uniform on, though it looked ridiculous. The pants were too short, showing his ankles, and the jacket could not close properly across his chest. He grabbed his boots and followed Pip 7 out of the room. The corridors were full of cadets hurrying to formation. All of them moved with the light, graceful steps that came naturally in the station's low gravity. Jake, meanwhile, had to concentrate with each step to avoid bouncing off the ceiling or moving too fast. Several times he stumbled, his heavy footsteps echoing loudly in the quiet halls. Other cadets stopped to stare. Some pointed at his ill-fitting uniform and whispered among themselves. A few laughed openly. Jake tried to ignore them, but he could feel his face getting red with embarrassment. The formation area was a large open space with cadets arranged in neat rows according to their squads. Jake found Squad Vex 7 and took his place next to Pip 7. Crix Val stood at the front of their group, his black eyes cold as they looked Jake up and down. "So," Crix Val said loudly enough for nearby squads to hear, "the Deathworlders decided to join us. How generous." An instructor stepped forward to address all the cadets. She was tall and thin, with silver skin and no hair. Her voice carried easily across the formation without shouting. "Today we begin weapons training," she announced. "Each cadet will be issued a standard plasma rifle. You will learn to maintain it operate it safely, and use it effectively. The cadets were dismissed to collect their weapons from the armory. Jake followed the line, still struggling with the light gravity. When his turn came, the armory clerk, a squat alien with 6 arms, looked him up and down with obvious distaste. "Standard issue for Deathworlder," the clerk said, handing Jake a plasma rifle. The weapon felt wrong in Jake's hands. It was too light, too small, too delicate. The grip was sized for hands much smaller than his, and the trigger guard barely fit his finger. The weapon that should have felt deadly felt more like a toy. "Is there a larger size?" Jake asked. The clerk made a harsh sound that might have been laughter. "One size fits all civilized beings. If it does not fit you, perhaps you should return to your savage world." Jake bit back his response and took the weapon. Around him, other cadets handled their rifles with easy familiarity. They moved with practiced motions, checking safety mechanisms and adjusting settings that Jake did not understand. The training moved to an indoor range. Each cadet took position at a firing line facing targets at the far end of the room. An instructor demonstrated the proper stance, grip, and firing procedure. The plasma rifles made almost no sound when fired, just a soft humming noise. The energy bolts traveled to the targets as bright blue streaks. Jake watched the other cadets fire. Their movements were precise and controlled. They fired slowly and carefully, taking time to aim each shot. When they hit the target, they seemed pleased with themselves. When Jake's turn came, he raised a small rifle and tried to find a comfortable position. The weapon felt awkward and unbalanced. The sights were difficult to line up with his human eyes. He squeezed the trigger. The energy bolt went wide, missing the target completely. The other cadets in his squad made sounds of amusement. Crixval shook his head in disgust. "Again," the instructor said. Jake fired again. This shot hit the target, but far from the center. He could hear whispers from the other cadets. Words like primitive and clumsy reached his ears in the various alien languages. The training continued for hours. Jake slowly improved, but he was clearly the worst shooter in the group. The alien cadets seemed to have a natural understanding of the weapon's energy patterns and targeting systems. What came naturally to them required intense concentration from Jake. During a break, Jake sat alone while the other cadets gathered in small groups. They spoke in their native languages, but he could tell from their glances and gestures that he was the topic of conversation. Pip-7 approached carefully, carrying 2 cups of what looked like water but tasted like flowers. "Thank you," Jake said, accepting the drink. "The others are making bets," Pip-7 said quietly. "About what?" "How long you will last. Most think you will quit before the week ends. Crixval says you will be gone in 3 days. Jake looked across the range at his squad leader. Crixval was demonstrating his shooting technique to a group of admiring cadets. His shots grouped tightly in the center of the target. "What do you think?" Jake asked. Pip-7 was quiet for a moment. "I think they do not understand humans. They think because you're different, you are weak. But last night, I watched you adapt. You figured out how to use the bathroom fixtures, even though they were too small. You made the bed work even though it was the wrong size. You did not complain or give up. That's not the same as being good at this," Jake said, gesturing at the range. "Maybe not," Pip-7 agreed, "but it is something they cannot do. None of them have ever had to adapt. Everything has always been built for them, designed for them. They do not know how to make things work when they are wrong." The instructor called for the training to resume. Jake returned to his position at the firing line. The rifle still felt wrong in his hands, but he was beginning to understand its balance and timing. His shots were getting closer to the target center. As the day ended, Jake felt exhausted, not from physical effort, but from the constant strain of trying to fit into a world not built for him. Everything from the doorways to the weapons to the uniforms seemed designed to remind him that he did not belong. Back in their quarters, Pip-7 helped Jake understand the Academy's computer system and class schedules. The interfaces were all designed for alien eyes and hands, but Jake slowly figured out how to navigate them. "Tomorrow is physical training," Pip-7 said, reading from his schedule. "Combat exercises and endurance tests." Jake smiled for the first time all day. Now that sounds more interesting. Pip 7 looked worried. You should be careful. Crixval is very competitive. He will not want to be shown up by a Deathworlder. Let him worry about that. Jake said, I've been doing physical training since I was 18. At least that's something I understand. Outside their window, the stars turned slowly as the station rotated. Jake had survived his first day at the academy. Barely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time since arriving, he felt like he might have a chance to succeed. The combat simulation arena was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The room could change its shape and environment at will, creating different battlefields for training exercises. Today it resembled a rocky canyon with narrow passages and high walls. Jake stood with Squad Vex, 7 at one end of the arena, wearing simulation armor that felt as wrong as everything else at the academy. The suit was too tight across his shoulders and too loose around his waist. The helmet barely fit over his human-sized head, and the display systems were hard to read. Crixval addressed the squad with his usual cold manner. Today we face Squad Prime Alpha in combat simulation. They are the Academy's top unit. We will probably lose, but we must try not to embarrass ourselves completely. He looked directly at Jake when he said the last part. The enemy squad took their positions at the other end of the arena. Jake could see them through his helmet display, marked as red dots on his tactical screen. Squad Prime Alpha was led by Zex Prime, a tall alien from Hegemony with golden skin and 4 arms. His reputation as the Academy's best tactical leader was well known. Remember, Crixval continued, this is simulation. The weapons fire training bolts that will register hits on your armor. When you are hit, your suit will simulate pain and injury. 3 hits will disable you completely. Jake nodded along with the others, but he was thinking about the simulation system. Pain simulation designed for alien nervous systems might not work the same way on humans. The exercise began with a loud tone. Both squads moved into the rocky terrain, seeking cover and trying to outmaneuver each other. Jake followed his squad mates, but his heavy footsteps made stealth difficult. In the light gravity, he had to concentrate to keep from bouncing off rocks and walls. Within minutes, the first shots were fired. Energy bolts zipped through the air, and Jake's squad mates took cover behind boulders and in narrow passages. The simulation weapons made the same soft humming sound as the real ones, but the bolts were bright yellow instead of blue. Jake found cover behind a large rock and tried to spot enemies. His alien squad mates moved with practiced efficiency, communicating through hand signals and coordinated movements. They had trained together for months and knew each other's capabilities. A yellow bolt hit the rock near Jake's head, showering him with simulated stone fragments. He spotted the shooter, a member of Squad Prime Alpha position on a high ledge. Jake aimed his simulation rifle and fired back. The bolt hit its target, and the enemy cadet's armor registered the hit with a bright flash. The alien immediately fell flat and stopped moving, apparently overwhelmed by the simulated pain. Jake was surprised. That level of pain simulation would barely slow down a human soldier, but it had completely disabled the alien. More shots came his way. Jake moved from cover to cover, advancing toward the enemy position. Around him, his squad mates were falling to enemy fire. Each hit caused him to cry out and stumble, and multiple hits left him writhing on the ground in simulated agony. A bolt caught Jake in the shoulder. His armor flashed red, and he felt a sharp electric shock through the suit. It hurt, but not enough to stop him. He kept moving and firing. Another hit struck his leg. More electricity coursed through his body, and his display showed damage warnings. According to the simulation, he should be severely wounded and barely able to function. But Jake felt only minor discomfort. He advanced on an enemy position where 2 aliens had taken cover. They saw him coming and fired rapidly, scoring another hit on his chest. Jake's armor showed critical damage, indicating he should be unconscious or dead. Instead, he charged their position. The 2 enemies stared in shock as a supposedly disabled human vaulted over their cover and tagged them both with point-blank shots. They collapsed immediately, overwhelmed by their armor's pain simulation. "Impossible," one of them gasped. "You were critically hit. You should be down." Jake moved on, hunting the remaining enemies. His armor's damage display was flashing red warnings. But his human nervous system was not responding to the alien pain simulation the way it was supposed to. He found Zex Prime directing his remaining squad members from a concealed position. The golden-skinned alien was coordinating a tactical retreat when Jake appeared behind him. "Surrender," Jake said, pointing his rifle at the squad leader. Zex Prime spun around, his forearms moving to raise his weapon. Jake fired first, hitting him center mass. The alien leader collapsed with a cry of pain, his armor registering a disabling hit. Exercise terminated. Came the announcement over the arena speakers. Squad Vex, 7 wins. Jake looked around the battlefield. Most of his squad mates were down, simulating various levels of injury and unconsciousness. But the entire enemy squad was also disabled, and Jake was still standing. The arena returned to its normal configuration, and medical instructors moved in to help the wounded cadets. Jake removed his helmet and walked over to where Crixval was slowly getting to his feet. "How?" Crixval demanded. "You took 3 critical hits. You should have been unconscious." "I guess the simulation doesn't work the same on humans," Jake said. An instructor approached them, a tall alien with multiple eyes and a serious expression. "Cadet Morrison, please report to the medical center for examination. Your suit's readings indicate you suffered fatal damage but continued fighting." "I feel fine," Jake said. "That is the problem," the instructor replied. "Either your armor malfunctioned, or human physiology does not respond to our training systems as expected." Word of the exercise spread quickly through the academy. By evening, every cadet knew that the Deathworlder had won a combat simulation while technically dead. Some were impressed. Others were disturbed. In the dining hall, Jake sat with Pip 7 at a table near the back. Other cadets stared and whispered, but few approached them. "The medical staff is very confused," Pip 7 said quietly. "They tested your nervous system for hours. They say human pain tolerance is far beyond anything they have on record. It's not that we don't feel pain," Jake explained. "We just don't let it stop us. On Earth, if pain stopped you every time you felt it, you'd never survive." Across the dining hall, Zex Prime sat with his squad. The golden alien's eyes kept finding Jake, and his expression was not friendly. "Zex Prime is angry," Pip 7 observed. "He has never lost a simulation before. Some of the other squad leaders are saying the exercise was unfair because the simulation was not calibrated for humans. So they want a rematch with different rules?" Jake asked. "Worse," Pip 7 said. "They are saying that humans are too different to train with other species. They want you removed from the program." Jake looked around the dining hall at the alien cadets. Many of them were watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to fear to hostility. He had proven that humans could excel at combat training, but apparently that was not a good thing. "What do you think will happen?" Jake asked. Pip 7 considered the question carefully. "I think they are afraid. They have always believed that their advanced technology and refined tactics make them superior warriors. But you won today using nothing but determination and pain tolerance. That challenges everything they believe about military superiority." Jake nodded. He had come to the academy to learn and to represent humanity well, but every success seemed to create new problems. The more he proved human capabilities, the more threatened the aliens felt. "Maybe they're right," Jake said. "Maybe I don't belong here." "No," Pip 7 said firmly. "They are wrong. You belong here because you can do things they cannot. That is exactly why you should stay." News of Jake's victory in the combat simulation spread beyond the academy walls. Within days, reports reached the Galactic Council about the human who had fought while technically dead. Some council members were impressed by human resilience. Others expressed concern about allowing such unstable beings into military service. Jake felt a change in atmosphere immediately. Instructors who had been merely dismissive now watched him with obvious wariness. Fellow cadets gave him wider space in the corridors, as if he might explode without warning. Even the academy's automated systems seemed to work against him, with doors closing too quickly and elevators departing before it could board. The academic classes were particularly difficult. Jake struggled with alien mathematics, physics that assumed different universal constants, and tactical theories based on species that could not endure physical hardship. His human perspective often led to solutions that instructors deemed unnecessarily aggressive or barbarically direct. During a tactical planning class, the instructor presented a scenario where civilians were trapped in a building under enemy fire. The other cadets proposed elaborate plans involving negotiation, technological solutions, and careful maneuvering to avoid casualties. Jake raised his hand. Why not just assault the building directly, fast and hard, before they can hurt anyone else? The classroom fell silent. The instructor, an elderly alien with pale blue skin, looked shocked. Cadet Morrison, the instructor said slowly, your solution would result in significant casualties among the rescue force. But it would save the civilians, Jake replied. Sometimes you have to accept losses to complete the mission. The other cadets exchanged worried glances. To them, the idea of deliberately accepting casualties was horrifying. Your people truly are deathworlders, one cadet whispered. After class, Jake found himself increasingly isolated. Even Pip-7 seemed nervous around him, though he tried to hide it. The small alien would flinch whenever Jake moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. The real trouble started when Zex Prime began actively campaigning against Jake's presence. The golden-skinned hegemony noble had influence among the Academy's elite cadets, and he used it to spread fear about human unpredictability. The Deathworlder is dangerous, Zex Prime told anyone who would listen. His people saw problems with violence. They accept casualties that civilized species would never tolerate. How long before his primitive instincts turn against us? Jake overheard these conversations but tried to ignore them. He focused on his studies and training, working twice as hard as anyone else to prove he belonged. But every achievement seemed to make things worse. When he scored perfectly on a weapons maintenance exam, instructors worried about his obsession with military hardware. When he completed endurance training that left other cadets exhausted, they called a performance unnaturally aggressive. When he volunteered for extra duties, they interpreted it as evidence of his unstable need for conflict. The breaking point came during a leadership exercise. Each squad was given a complex problem to solve under time pressure. Squad Vex 7 was tasked with rescuing hostages from a space station while avoiding civilian casualties and minimizing damage to infrastructure. Crixval, as squad leader, developed a careful plan involving staged withdrawals and minimal force. It was elegant and sophisticated, exactly the kind of solution the Academy favored. But Jake could see it would take too long. The hostages will be dead before we reach them, Jake said during the planning session. We must follow proper procedures, Crixval replied coldly. We cannot simply charge in like savages. Sometimes charging in is the right answer, Jake insisted. The argument that followed was heated. Other squad members took sides, with most supporting Crixval's cautious approach. Jake found himself alone, arguing for a plan that others saw as recklessly violent. In the end, Crixval's plan was implemented. It failed. The simulated hostages died, while the squad was still positioning for their careful assault. Jake said nothing during the debrief, but his expression spoke volumes. Word of the argument reached Zex Prime, who saw it as perfect evidence of human instability. He began organizing other squad leaders, building a coalition to demand Jake's removal from the Academy. The human cannot control his violent impulses, Zex Prime told his supporters. He argues for aggressive solutions to every problem. He shows no respect for civilized methods or proper procedures. He is exactly what we feared Deathworlders would be. The campaign gained momentum when several instructors privately expressed similar concerns. Jake's academic file filled with notes about it concerning behavioral patterns and potential for instability. Psychological evaluators recommended increased monitoring and possible remedial training in appropriate response protocols. Jake became aware of the growing opposition when Pip-7 reluctantly told him about the meetings and discussions happening behind closed doors. They are afraid of you, Pip-7 said sadly, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you represent something they do not understand. What do they want? Jake asked. Zex Prime is petitioning the Academy Board to have you removed. He says you are a danger to other cadets and to the future of galactic military cooperation. Jake felt a familiar anger building in his chest. It was the same feeling he had experienced in combat zones on Earth when politicians made decisions that put soldiers at risk. The anger of someone who understood hard truths that others refused to see. And what does the board think? They are considering it, Pip 7 admitted. Admiral FX9 is under pressure from the Galactic Council. Some council members believe the human exchange program was a mistake. That night, Jake stood at the window of his quarters looking out at the stars. Somewhere among them was Earth, where humans had learned to survive in a hostile universe through determination, sacrifice, and the willingness to make hard choices. Here at the Academy, those same qualities were seen as dangerous flaws. He could leave. The easy path would be to accept defeat and return to Earth. No one there would blame him for trying. But Jake was not built to take easy paths. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Admiral FX9 had scheduled a formal review of Jake's case. Representatives from the Galactic Council would attend. The future of human participation in galactic military affairs would be decided in a single hearing. Jake prepared for the fight of his life, not knowing that some of his opponents had already decided that legal proceedings were too slow. Zex Prime and his supporters had concluded that the Deathworlder problem required a more direct solution. The stage was set for a confrontation that would prove once and for all whether humans belonged among the stars, or whether they were too dangerous to trust with the galaxy's future. A formal review was scheduled for the end of the week, but Zex Prime had no intention of waiting that long. The golden-skinned hegemony noble met with his closest supporters in a private study room deep within the Academy's residential section. The hearing will be meaningless, Zex Prime told the gathered cadets. The human has supporters among the faculty. Some instructors are fascinated by Deathworlder capabilities. They will argue for his continuation in the program. Around the table sat 6 of the Academy's most influential students. They represented the galaxy's major political powers and came from families with significant military connections. When they spoke, people listened. "What do you propose?" asked Rex 9, a pale alien with silver eyes from Consortium Worlds. "We need evidence of the human's instability," Zex Prime replied. "Something concrete that cannot be explained away or rationalized." "You mean we should provoke him?" said another cadet, a red-skinned female named Vix-2 from the Outer Territories. "Exactly. We arrange a situation where his violent nature is revealed, where he proves himself to be the dangerous savage we know him to be." The group spent hours planning their strategy. They would need to create a scenario that appeared accidental, where Jake's response would seem unprovoked and excessive. The incident would have to be serious enough to justify immediate expulsion, but not so obvious as to implicate conspirators. Rex 9 suggested sabotaging training equipment to create a dangerous malfunction. Vix 2 proposed arranging an accident during weapons training. But it was Zex Prime who came up with the perfect plan. "We use the emergency response drill," he said. "Every cadet knows the procedures. If someone were to violate those procedures during a real emergency, it would be seen as dangerous incompetence. But how do we guarantee the human will react incorrectly?" asked Rex 9. Zex Prime smiled coldly. "We create an emergency that requires exactly the kind of aggressive response he favors. Then we ensure he cannot communicate with emergency services. When he acts on his violent instincts, it will appear he ignored proper channels and endangered other cadets." The plan was elaborate but simple. During the next routine evacuation drill, they would trigger a real emergency in one of the training facilities. A small explosive device would create smoke and apparent structural damage. Several conspirators would position themselves as trapped victims calling for help. Zex Prime would ensure that communication systems in that section were disabled, making it impossible for Jake to contact emergency services through proper channels. When a human inevitably attempted a direct rescue instead of following evacuation procedures, it would be documented as evidence of his dangerous disregard for safety protocols. "The beauty of it," Zex Prime explained, "is that his Deathworlder instinct will compel him to act. He cannot help himself. When he does, we will have proof that humans are too unstable for military service." The conspirators spent the next 2 days preparing. They obtained a small explosive device from the Demolitions Training Laboratory, claiming it was for an authorized engineering project. They studied the Academy's emergency response procedures and identified the optimal location for their trap. Meanwhile, Jake continued his normal routine, unaware of the plot forming around him. His isolation had grown worse since news of the formal review spread. Most cadets now avoided him entirely, and even the few who had been friendly kept their distance. Pip 7 remained loyal but increasingly nervous. The small alien jumped at every sound and watched the corridors constantly, as if expecting trouble to appear at any moment. "You are making me paranoid," Jake told him during one of their rare conversations. "Maybe paranoid is good," Pip 7 replied. "I hear things. Whispers. Plans being made." "What kind of plans?" "I do not know specifics. But Zex Prime and his friends meet often. They stop talking when others approach. They are planning something." Jake tried to dismiss his roommate's concerns, but he could not shake the feeling that danger was approaching. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming warnings. The opportunity Zex Prime needed came during a routine maintenance period. Half the Academy students were in classes, while the others participated in facility upkeep. Jake was assigned to inspect safety equipment in the older training sections, work that kept him isolated from other cadets. Zex Prime and his conspirators moved quickly. They planted their explosive device in Training Facility 7, a rarely used section of the Academy devoted to environmental survival exercises. The facility contained multiple chambers that could simulate different planetary conditions. Rex 9 disabled the communication array for that section, making it appear to be a routine maintenance shutdown. Vix 2 and 2 other conspirators positioned themselves in the facility, ready to play the role of trapped victims. When everything was ready, Zex Prime triggered the explosive. The blast was small but effective. Smoke filled the facility's main corridor, and debris blocked several exits. Emergency lights began flashing, and the Academy's alert system activated throughout the station. Jake was 2 sections away when he heard the explosion. Training and instinct took over immediately. He dropped his inspection tools and ran toward the sound, his heavy footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. He reached Training Facility 7 within minutes. Smoke was pouring from the entrance, and he could hear voices calling for help from inside. The facility's emergency communication panel was dark, apparently disabled by the explosion. Jake tried his personal communicator, but got only static. The blast had damaged more systems than expected, or someone had sabotaged the communications. Either way, emergency services would take time to respond, and people were trapped inside. Without hesitation, Jake entered the smoke-filled facility. "Help!" came a voice from deeper in the complex. "We're trapped." Jake followed the sound, navigating by memory through corridors he had studied during safety inspections. The smoke was thick and acrid, making breathing difficult. His human physiology handled the toxic air better than most species would, but it was still dangerous. He found Vix 2 and another cadet in one of the simulation chambers. They were crouched behind an overturned table, apparently sheltering from falling debris. "The ceiling is unstable," Vix 2 called out. "We cannot move without bringing it down." Jake assessed the situation quickly. The chamber's dome ceiling showed stress fractures, and small pieces of material were falling steadily. The 2 cadets were indeed trapped, though Jake noted that their positioning seemed oddly convenient. "Stay where you are," he called back. "I'll find another way." But as he turned to leave, he heard more voices calling for help from other chambers. Multiple cadets were trapped throughout the facility, and time was running out. The smoke was getting thicker, and the structural damage was spreading. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of retreating to wait for proper emergency response, he began a systematic search and rescue operation. His human strength and endurance allowed him to move debris that would stop other species. His tolerance for pain and toxic environments let him go places where alien rescuers could not follow. One by one, he found the trapped cadets and carried them to safety. Each rescue convinced him more that waiting for official help would mean unnecessary casualties. His deathworlder instincts, evolved on a planet where hesitation meant death, drove him forward. What Jake did not know was that every action was being recorded by hidden cameras. Zex Prime and his conspirators were documenting evidence of humans' reckless disregard for proper procedures and dangerous violation of emergency protocols. The trap was working perfectly. Jake was proving everything they wanted to prove about human instability and violence. Soon, they would have all the evidence they needed to end the human exchange program forever. Jake had rescued 4 cadets from the damaged facility when he realized something was wrong. The voices calling for help had been too convenient. The positioning of the trapped cadets too perfect. His military training recognized the signs of a setup, but it was too late to change course. Whether the emergency was real or staged, people were still in danger from the smoke and structural damage. Jake continued his rescue efforts, knowing that his actions were probably being recorded and would be used against him. He had just carried the last victim to safety when official emergency responders finally arrived. The team was led by Commander Hex 7, the Academy's chief of security. The tall, blue-skinned alien surveyed the scene with obvious displeasure. Cadet Morrison, Commander Hex 7 said coldly, "Explain your actions." Jake stood covered in smoke residue and debris, his uniform torn from crawling through damaged sections. Around him, the rescue cadets sat or stood in small groups, most avoiding eye contact. "I heard the explosion and responded." Jake said simply, "Communication systems were down. People were trapped. I got them out." "Did you attempt to contact emergency services?" "I tried. The systems were disabled." "Did you follow evacuation procedures?" Jake hesitated. He knew where this was leading. "No, sir. People were in immediate danger." Commander Hex 7 nodded grimly. "You violated direct orders regarding emergency response. You entered a potentially unstable structure without authorization. You failed to establish proper communication with emergency control. Your actions could have resulted in additional casualties." "But they didn't," Jake replied. "Everyone got out safely." "That is not the point. The point is that you ignored established procedures and acted on your own initiative. Such behavior is exactly what we have come to expect from deathworlders." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Getting angry would only prove their point about human instability. The investigation that followed was swift and damning. Security recordings showed Jake entering the facility without authorization, moving through dangerous areas without proper safety equipment, and carrying out rescues without coordinating with emergency services. What the recordings did not show was Zex Prime and his conspirators planting the explosive device or disabling the communication systems. Those actions had been carefully planned to avoid detection. Within hours, Jake was called before an emergency hearing. The formal review had been moved up, and representatives from the Galactic Council participated via secure communication links. Ake's transport off Kepler Station was scheduled for the next morning. He spent his last evening at the Academy packing his few belongings and saying goodbye to Pip 7, who was the only cadet brave enough to visit him openly. "I am sorry this happened," Pip 7 said sadly. "You did not deserve this treatment." "Maybe they're right," Jake replied, folding his torn Academy uniform. "Maybe humans don't belong here." "No," Pip 7 said firmly. "They are afraid because you showed them something they did not want to see. You showed them that their advanced technology and careful procedures are not always enough. Sometimes courage and determination matter more." Jake looked out the window at the stars one last time. Tomorrow he would be heading back to Earth, carrying news that humanity's first attempt at joining galactic civilization had failed. "What will you do now?" Pip 7 asked. "Go home. Report what happened. Let others decide if it's worth trying again." "I hope they do try again," Pip 7 said. "The galaxy needs more beings like you, even if it does not realize it yet." After Pip 7 left, Jake finished packing and lay down on his small bed. He was exhausted from the hearing and the stress of the past few days. Despite everything that had happened, he fell asleep quickly. He woke to the sound of the door chime. The chronometer showed it was well past midnight. Jake assumed it was Pip 7 returning with something he had forgotten to say. But when the door opened, Zex Prime stood in the corridor. Behind him were 5 other cadets, all members of his inner circle. Their expressions were cold and hostile. "Cadet Morrison," Zex Prime said formally, "We need to speak with you." Jake's military instincts immediately warned him of danger. 6 against 1, in a deserted corridor in the middle of the night. This was not a social visit. "It's late," Jake said carefully. "Whatever you want to discuss can wait until morning." "No," Zex Prime replied, stepping into the room. The others followed, surrounding Jake. "It cannot wait. You see, your expulsion is not enough. You have demonstrated capabilities that threaten the natural order of galactic civilization. That cannot be allowed to continue." Jake backed toward the center of the room, keeping all 6 aliens in sight. "What are you talking about?" "You prove that deathworlders possess military advantages that our species lack," Rex 9 said, his silver eyes gleaming. "Pain tolerance, physical strength, aggressive instincts. These advantages could make humans a dominant military force." "So," Jake asked. "So that cannot be permitted," Zex Prime replied. "The galaxy has enjoyed peace under the current power structure. Our species have evolved beyond the need for savage warrior instincts. We will not allow primitive deathworlders to upset that balance." Jake realized they were not here to talk. This was an execution squad. "You're going to kill me," he said flatly. "An unfortunate training accident," Vix 2 said with mock sadness. "The unstable humans suffered a breakdown and attacked fellow cadets. We were forced to defend ourselves." Zex Prime produced a military-grade plasma rifle from behind his back. The other conspirators also revealed weapons they concealed under their clothing. "This will send a clear message to your species," Zex Prime continued. "Humans who attempt to join galactic civilization will face consequences. Your people will learn to stay on their primitive world where they belong." Jake assessed the situation rapidly. 6 armed opponents in a small room with limited cover. No weapons of his own except whatever he could improvise. No chance of calling for help before they killed him. His military training offered only one option: attack first and hope to take some of them down before they could organize their response. "Any last words, Deathworlder?" Zex Prime asked, raising his rifle. "Yeah," Jake said. "You should have brought more people." Zex Prime's expression changed from confidence to confusion. Before he could respond, Jake lunged forward. The first plasma bolt caught Jake in the shoulder as he moved. The energy burned through his skin and muscle, sending waves of pain through his body. But human physiology and adrenaline allowed him to keep moving. The second shot hit him in the chest as he reached Rex 9. Jake's hand closed around the silver-eyed alien's throat, and he used the smaller being as a shield while advancing on the others. "Impossible," Vix 2 gasped. "He should be down." The third shot struck Jake in the side as he threw Rex 9 into 2 other conspirators. The energy bolt seared through flesh and muscle, causing damage that would have killed most galactic species instantly. Jake staggered but remained upright. His human nervous system, evolved on a world where injuries were common and medical care was primitive, kept him functional despite wounds that should have been fatal. The aliens panicked. They had expected the human to collapse after the first shot, as any civilized being would. Instead, they faced a wounded predator who was getting angrier with each hit. Jake grabbed a metal chair and hurled it at Zex Prime, knocking the rifle from the golden alien's hands. 2 conspirators tried to flee toward the door, but Jake's longer stride and superior strength in the low gravity allowed him to catch them. The remaining conspirators barricaded themselves in the room's small bathroom, sealing the reinforced door behind them. They could hear Jake moving around outside, his heavy footsteps punctuated by the sound of furniture being thrown around. "Call for help," one of them whispered frantically. "With what?" Zex Prime hissed back. "We disabled the communications, remember?" Outside the bathroom, Jake was dealing with his injuries. The plasma burns were serious, and he was losing blood. But his human constitution and military medical training allowed him to assess the damage and continue functioning. He looked at the sealed bathroom door. It was designed to contain environmental hazards during training exercises, built to withstand significant pressure and impact. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible to break down. But Jake was no longer thinking normally. Pain, adrenaline, and rage had activated every survival instinct in his human DNA. The door was not just a barrier. It was an obstacle keeping him from enemies who had tried to murder him. Jake studied the door's construction for a moment, identifying its structural weak points. Then he stepped back and drove his shoulder into it with all the force his human muscles could generate. The impact sent shock waves through his injured body, but the door held. Inside the bathroom, the conspirators heard the first impact and felt the door shake in its frame. "What is he doing?" Rex 9 whispered. Jake hit the door again, and again. Each impact was accompanied by a roar of pain and fury that chilled the alien's blood. Cracks began to appear in the doorframe. "He cannot break through," Vix 2 said, but her voice lacked confidence. "It is impossible." The fourth impact shattered the frame. The fifth tore the door from its mountings. On the sixth impact, the reinforced barrier that was supposed to withstand environmental disasters gave way completely. Jake Morrison, bleeding from 3 plasma wounds that should have killed him, stood in the doorway like an avenging angel. His eyes held the kind of primal fury that had once faced down saber-toothed cats and survived ice ages. The 6 aliens who had come to kill the dangerous Deathworlder finally understood what dangerous really meant. The sound of the reinforced door being destroyed echoed to the residential section like thunder. Emergency alarms activated automatically, responding to the structural damage sensors. Security teams throughout Kepler Station received alerts about a possible hull breach or catastrophic equipment failure. Commander Hex 7 arrived with a full security squad within minutes, expecting to find an environmental emergency or terrorist attack. Instead, they discovered Jake Morrison standing over 6 cowering cadets in what remained of his quarters. Jake's appearance was terrifying. Plasma burns covered his shoulder, chest, and side, with blood seeping through his torn clothing. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes still burned with the fury that had carried him through the assault. In his hands were fragments of the door he had literally torn apart. The 6 conspirators huddled together in the destroyed bathroom, their weapons scattered across the floor. Several were injured from flying debris and furniture. All of them were in shock from witnessing something they had believed impossible. "What happened here?" Commander Hex 7 demanded, his security team spreading out to secure the scene. Zex Prime tried to speak first. "The human went insane," he gasped. "He attacked us without provocation. We were forced to defend ourselves." But Jake's wounds told a different story. The plasma burns were clearly from weapons fire, and their placement suggested he had been moving toward his attackers rather than away from them. No defensive shooting would have produced that pattern. Commander Hex 7 was an experienced investigator. He quickly identified the weapons used and began collecting evidence. Within an hour, security recordings from corridor cameras revealed the conspiracy. The footage showed Zex Prime and his companions approaching Jake's quarters armed and coordinated, clearly planning an assault. Admiral Fex 9 was awakened and briefed on the situation. She arrived at the medical center where Jake was being treated for his injuries, her expression grim. "The human will survive," the chief medical officer reported, "but his injuries should have been fatal. Our plasma weapons are calibrated to stop any known galactic species with a single shot. The fact that he remained functional after 3 direct hits is unprecedented." Admiral Fex 9 studied Jake through the medical bay window. The human lay unconscious on a treatment table, his wounds being repaired by alien medical technology. Monitoring equipment showed vital signs that were barely stable but somehow maintaining life. "Doctor," she asked quietly, "what does this tell us about human physiology?" The doctor, a many-tentacled being with vast medical experience, chose his words carefully. "It suggests that humans are far more resilient than we understood. Their pain tolerance, shock resistance, and ability to function through severe trauma exceed anything in our medical databases." "Is this normal for the species?" "Based on this single example, I would say yes. The human's responses appear to be evolutionary adaptations rather than anomalies. His entire physiology is designed for survival under extreme conditions." Admiral Fex 9 considered this information. The implications were staggering. If all humans possess this level of durability and determination, then the Galactic Council had seriously miscalculated humanity's potential. News of the incident spread rapidly through the Academy and beyond. The story of the human who had survived 3 fatal shots and broken down a reinforced door became legend within hours. Some viewed it with awe, others with fear. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the crisis. Representatives who had confidently voted to expel the human now faced uncomfortable questions about their decision-making process. Council Representative Kex Alpha, who had led the campaign against Jake, found himself on the defensive. The incident proves our point, he argued. Humans are dangerous and unstable. This violence confirms that they cannot be trusted in civilized society. But other council members were not convinced. Representative Thon 12 from the Outer Rim colonies raised a different perspective. The human was attacked in his sleep by 6 armed assassins. His response was defensive, not aggressive. If anything, this incident proves that humans show remarkable restraint. Restraint, Kex Alpha demanded. He destroyed a reinforced door with his bare hands. After being shot 3 times, Thon 12 replied, "Any of our species would have died from the first shot. The human not only survived, but continued fighting to protect himself. That is not madness. That is extraordinary determination." The debate raged for hours. Some council members called for immediate action to contain the human threat. Others argued for a complete reevaluation of their relationship with humanity. Meanwhile, Jake slowly regained consciousness in the medical bay. The alien medical technology had repaired most of his physical damage, but he felt weak and disoriented. Pip 7 sat beside his bed, looking relieved to see him awake. "How long was I out?" Jake asked. 2 days, Pip 7 replied. "The entire station is talking about what happened. They are calling you the Deathworlder, who cannot die." Jake tried to sit up, but found his body still weak from the trauma. "What about Zex Prime and the others?" "In custody. The evidence against them is overwhelming. They will face charges for attempted murder and conspiracy." "An expulsion order?" Pip 7's expression brightened. "Under review. Admiral Thex 9 has requested a full investigation into the Academy's treatment of human cadets. She says the incident reveals serious flaws in their understanding of your species." Over the following days, Jake's story spread throughout the galaxy. Human news networks picked up the account, and Earth's government began receiving communications from alien civilizations that had previously ignored them. The Zenthri Military Coalition, traditional rivals of the hegemony, sent representatives to discuss potential cooperation with humanity. The Outer Rim colonies, who faced frequent raids from aggressive species, expressed interest in human military advisors. Even species that had supported the expulsion began reconsidering their positions. The image of the wounded human breaking down an unbreakable door had become a symbol of something they had not expected. Unbreakable will. Admiral Thex 9 visited Jake personally as he recovered. Her manner was formal but respectful, a marked change from their previous interactions. "Cadet Morrison," she said, "I owe you an apology. The Academy failed in its duty to protect you, and our judgment of your species was clouded by prejudice and fear." "Thank you, Admiral," Jake replied, "but I understand why you were cautious. Humans are different." "Yes," she agreed, "but different does not mean inferior or dangerous. Your actions during the emergency and the assassination attempt have shown remarkable courage and restraint. You could have killed your attackers easily, but you chose to incapacitate them instead." Jake considered this. They were wrong, but they were still fellow cadets. Killing them would not have proven anything, except that they were right to fear us. Admiral Thex 9 nodded slowly. "That wisdom, combined with your demonstrated capabilities, suggests that humans have much to offer galactic civilization. Does that mean the exchange program will continue?" "Not just continue," Admiral Thex 9 replied. "Expand. The Galactic Council has voted to establish a full human military academy here on Kepler Station. You will be the first instructor." Jake looked surprised. "Me? I was expelled 3 days ago." "You were expelled based on false charges and manufactured evidence. Those decisions have been reversed. More importantly, you have demonstrated something that our advanced civilization have forgotten, that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from technology or tactics, but from the refusal to surrender." 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood before a class of mixed alien and human cadets. The human exchange program had indeed expanded, bringing dozens of young men and women from Earth to study alongside their galactic counterparts. The integration was not without challenges. Cultural differences still created misunderstandings, and some species remained wary of human capabilities. But the events surrounding Jake's near assassination had fundamentally changed the conversation. Humans were no longer seen as primitive savages to be tolerated. They were recognized as valuable allies who brought unique strengths to the galactic community. Their resilience, determination, and ability to function under extreme stress filled gaps in galactic military doctrine. Pip-7 had become Jake's teaching assistant, helping to bridge cultural divides between species. The small alien had overcome his initial fear and become one of humanity's strongest advocates in the Academy. Today, we will discuss Crisis leadership. Jake announced to his class the ability to make decisions and take action when normal procedures fail. A young hegemony cadet raised his hand. Instructor Morrison, what if taking action violates established protocols? Jake smiled, remembering a similar question from his own early days at the Academy. Then you have to decide what matters more, following rules or saving lives. Sometimes being a good soldier means breaking the rules. Outside the classroom windows, ships from dozens of species came and went from Kepler Station. The galaxy was changing, becoming more inclusive and more accepting of diversity. It had not been an easy transformation, but it had been necessary. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not by abandoning what made them human, but by proving that strength and civilization could coexist. The Deathworlder, who had been shot 3 times and broken down the door, had opened a new chapter in galactic history. And in classrooms throughout the Academy, young beings from hundreds of worlds learned that sometimes the most important lesson was the simplest one: never give up,